Kia ora, whānau. My name is Neurodiversity and I've got the great pleasure of facilitating the session today. I'm super excited because I'm certainly not an expert in this space, so I'm, like you'll be more expert than me, but really interested to listen and learn from these amazing kind of experts, leaders that we have in this topic. So a little bit about me. My name is Neurodiversity. I'm the founder of Propel Performance Group. And what I do is I study and I learn and I think about high performance day in, day out. And what we've done over the last decade is think about where can we learn about high performance outside of the executive space, so that might be sport, military, surgical, Formula One, and then how do we bring it back into some of the spaces that we share those sort of those learnings. So we do some work with the All Blacks, we do some work with surgical teams. And so some really interesting insights come out and some really, really interesting thoughts about how we lead people, how we grow people and how we encourage diversity of thought and thinking and style, which is some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. We have three amazing women here who that we're going to learn from. So we've got Jackie here, who is the organisational wellbeing consultant and a psychiatrist, so that's super interesting for us. We also have Anya, not Anya, this is the Irish name. And Anya is also into the transport and also the co-founder of Touchpoint. And then we have Marjorie, I lost it, I was ready for my Marietta. I'll set a very quick context and then I want to pass to these experts. But in the work that we do, the question that fascinates me is what separates the best from the rest? So if you think about sport, what's the difference between a truly high-performing team and then the kind of the good teams? You know, for us, our teams in black. Why are our teams in black the All Blacks, the Blackburns? Why are they so world-class? And then there's another tier down here. And what we learned when we went on a study discovering that sort of the answer to that question is that it actually comes down to our methodology, a very simple kind of way to think about it, and that is me, we, go. So go is what we all spend a phenomenal amount of our time doing in our businesses and our corporate lives. Go. So we're forecasting, we're strategy, we're measuring call rates, we're go, funnels, all sorts of things. That's the go piece of our work. The we stuff is obviously critical. How do we connect our teams? How do we lead our teams? All of those great things. But actually the difference between the best and the rest is what happens at the G level. Because whatever is going on for me will determine. Anya, in your work with a lens of contact centre, so this idea of, is this generational gap the thing, or is there always been, different flow and things going on, or is there some really specifics that, to sort of the conversation that Jackie was part of yesterday, that ring true, that actually do require us to think and act differently? What's your view when you put that contact centre lens across it?
So the data at the moment shows us that there are 5 generations in the workplace right now. I don't work with any 80-year-olds, but that's cool. 5, that's a lot. When you look at what each of those different generations, the motivators that come out, like how do these people speak, what do these people want, and that's such a big part of it, right? They want bean bags and snooker tables or foosball instead of work. That sounds great. When we look at any data that comes out like that, so Deloitte paper that's come out on, the absolute groundbreaking stuff that Gen Z wants, they want equity. Ridiculous. The cheek, exactly. They want flexible working. Oh my God, so demanding, how terrible. If you lay the numbers on top of what millennials want, it's the exact same data. It's the exact same thing. If you lay the numbers on top of the other 3 generations that are in, it's very, very similar. We just use quite different language. In contact centers, we're talking about, or in customer spaces, we're talking about high turnover, high volume, high stress. You're attracting into those spaces a lot of Gen Z. By the time we get to 2030, most of our workforce is going to be Gen Z. And in these spaces, it's often they're entry-level points of the business. You've got lots of much younger people at part of those teams. Being able to understand how do we communicate expectations And how do we have open and honest conversations, exactly what Jackie's spoken about. Actually, let's look at people as people and have honest conversations. We had a conversation about just before around some of the biggest problems in our teams are just unspoken things. They're things that, it's the conversation that you haven't had, the frog that you haven't eaten, whatever like the euphemism might be. What we're seeing in this space is that the clarity around expectation, we're lacking. We're not having those right conversations. We're having executive teams or senior leadership teams, they're very sure that the expectation is very clear. When you go and you speak to teams, nobody has a clue. They're like, yeah, we have some KPIs. People don't check them though, and I don't really know how I'm supposed to connect that to the wider, what is expected of me. I don't really know what's going on. So we have this disconnect, and that is just created by lack of communication and lack of expectation. Where we see in contact centers or high volume spaces across customer, we have a really interesting trend where you will have this understanding that expectations are really clear, but we don't do anything to inspect what we expect. So yeah, I assume that all of my team leads are doing their one-on-ones. Somebody comes to me one day, I haven't had one-on-one in 6 months. I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing for me. And so where we're having conversations with those leadership teams about inspecting what they're expecting, when we're talking about Gen Z, we're not talking about micromanagement. They're like, yeah, well, that's your job. You're supposed to do that. Also at like a pool table, whereas when we would have been speaking about previous generations, we might have been having conversations about micromanagement or about the man. That's what my dad always taught us against, don't do anything for the man. He's total rebel, he's great. So actually we're just seeing a shift in, we want expectations, we're expecting them, and if you don't communicate them clearly enough to me, I actually kind of will just guess what I'm supposed to do. How many people in the room just kind of guess most of the time what they're supposed to do? Are 100% of your expectations so clear? Hands up for now. Yeah. I a lot of the time, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm doing a good job. And then my manager comes and tells me, yeah, you're doing a good job, but I don't know why, and I don't know how. And so we just see that lack of clarity and leaders crying out for, okay, that's all great, but teach me how to give clarity. And so that's probably what's really top of mind right now.
So interesting, Maritha, are we talking about accountability, clarity, alignment, all those things, or are we talking about generational gap, in your view, with your lens?
Interesting, and I think a little bit of a build on some of what Anya was saying here in terms of the data. When we look at what, there's been really, really great research done by McCrindle, Australian-based recently, and when they go, what is the number one thing that across generations every individual value about a workplace? It's trust. Doesn't matter. Every single generation says, this is my number one value in the workplace. What is it that you value in your co-workers? Hard work. Yeah, Gen Z also values hard work. So what we need to get to is the definition of that. What is the definition of trust across the various generations, and what's the definition of hard work? And that's where we need to build those connects. So if we talk about does generations matter, yes, there's a school of thought that says actually that's just another labeling tool, another thing of othering people, and maybe we shouldn't go that direction, and we should talk about life stages, because somebody entering the workplace after they've had children could have the same needs as somebody entering the workplace. I mean, there's some value in that thinking. I think that when we look at the societal, economic, technological shifts that's happening and the contexts within which people grow up, it does have a major impact. So we do see that there's still some of this labeling that does have some value. I think what is really, so I think that as a framework, anything that helps us to better understand the lived experience of somebody else is useful. When it becomes not useful is when we start using that as shorthand for stereotyping. And when that is something that we go like, oh, well, it's just one of those, without having the open-mindedness to say, how are we interrogating that? So, and the other thing is, if that's the only label that we then assign, So when we look at it through a DEI lens, we go, people don't only show up with age, do they? So imagine you've got somebody in your contact center, 23-year-old woman, migrated from Sri Lanka with her mum after her dad deserted the family, left them with lots of debt, and now she's here, she's been bullied at school here, and now she's in your contact center. Gosh, if she shows up with mental health problems, what is the identity that shows up? Is it age? Perhaps not. Perhaps it's an intersection of many different things. So it's really, really important for us to understand generational theory and understand how some of that could be useful for us, but also look at how do we look at it intersectionally through all of the other identities that people might bring to that party, and go, how do we bespoke our response to an individual to understand and to explore their lived experience, and not expect of ourselves to just have all of these theories and pictures in our minds and now the correct tick box of how we are going to manage it. Because actually the silver bullet in all of this stuff is talk to your people. That's actually really it.
Great. Jackie, that's a great example that Maritha brought up there. So you get someone's coming to you with a dynamic, diverse background, not coping well, you're a leader under pressure. From a mental well-being point of view, how would you approach, give us some insight, how would you approach a situation like that with care, with empathy, with however you would do it?
Sure. And this is probably a large part of the time I spend with leaders, is how you build those meaningful relationships with a leadership wellbeing lens. And interesting again, kind of looking at how that's changed in organisations over the last 12 years. For a long time, mental health training, mental health first aid was really hot in organisations, and many leaders went on training to a point where I think it actually started to become risky, because as a leader I don't want you knowing how to diagnose depression. I don't want you knowing how to diagnose anxiety. That's my job, not yours. What I do want leaders to be able to do is to know their staff, is to be able to have meaningful conversations, is to onboard them well. And onboarding them well for me, and when I work with leaders, is things like, what enables you to be the best version of yourself at work? Have you got an understanding of what situations are likely to trigger stress or overwhelm for you? When you feel stressed and overwhelmed, how would I notice that? Because if I looked in this room, all of us would show up differently if we were stressed and overwhelmed. If I notice that, how would you like me to support you in those times? To me, that is a really helpful leadership, well-being, onboarding conversation. But that doesn't end there. Then I think it's the ongoing, frequent check-ins with people. And I think language is really helpful for well-being conversations, because when you ask people, how are you? They will say, I'm fine. And then where does the conversation go from there? So it's again, I think, supporting leaders to be able to have those meaningful conversations within a boundary. Because what we also don't want is leaders crossing boundaries. I've had head of contact centres that I'm thinking of in a particular organisation take staff home that are experiencing domestic violence. You can sleep in my spare room. I've had staff going, there's nowhere in this office to have conversations that are difficult, because the only rooms are glass centred and they're known as the crying room. So come round and have a cup of tea at home and we'll have that conversation. So I think it's really supporting leaders to be able to have really good conversations that are connected to work, that fall within a boundary. But then thinking about the me, out of the me we go in this, you have to have capacity to have that conversation. You have to have capacity to want to welcome openly new people into your team and to get to know them and to have an understanding about what they need to work well at work. And so, for me, through that, I go, for you, how do you build your capacity? What do you need to fill your tank emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually? Have you got a really clear understanding? And I call them pillars of health. I think about my husband, and he would say, I need a C&C every day, a coffee and croissant on my own for 30 minutes. And if I get my C&C in the morning, then I've got clarity. I can work well, I can be present with the kids when I need to, but if I haven't had that time, I haven't fueled my tank. And so for all of you, at that kind of level, what are your C&Cs? Physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, and do you have that? So when you walk in the door at work, You know, not all of us are we're not perfect, we're not robots, and it will probably be 80% of the time. But 80% of the time, can I be present? Can I be empathetic? Can I be reflective? Can I be the leader I need to be? And if I can't do that today, have I got the capacity to be able to even look and say, can we have this conversation this afternoon? I just need to be able to finish this off, or I really want to be present with you when I have this conversation. So for me, that's I suppose the shift in thinking around leadership and mental health and wellbeing, where I think it's now part of the leadership hat rather than sitting on its own as an adjunct in organisations, which from some views is really helpful, because mental health and wellbeing now becomes systemic. It's something we all need to do, but I also believe leaders need to feel backed with skills and tools from your organisation so that you're not at risk when you're managing and leading this day in, day out.
Yeah, great. Anya, if we keep building on that great insight from Jackie, so we have enough self-awareness that us as leaders, we know we have to have capacity to even have those conversations. If I start moving us into the neurodiversity topic, what else would be good for us to know? What else should we have in our backpack, in our toolbox? So when we're in a good form, ready to have those conversations, we've also got some even greater sort of awareness of some of the other things that might be going on for the people that we're working with.
Nice. So when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about such a broad, it's a really, really broad term. So we might be talking about diagnosable neurodiversities, where we're talking about ADHD, autism. We might be talking about anxiety or depression, or we might be talking about like head injuries and like traumatic brain injuries. We see neurodiversity, it's huge the last kind of 5 years, right? Nobody was able to work from home during COVID because neurodiversity started popping up on people's TikTok, and lots of people decided, this is why working from home and being by myself and totally leading myself is incredibly difficult. That was my experience. That was when I realized, my brain, my prefrontal cortex works differently to other people's. Oh no, it's not just that I'm quirky and fun. And often when we're speaking to businesses and we're speaking, you'll experience this far more than I will, we talk about any types of diversity. We'll have, maybe some detractors in the room that roll their eyes, another diversity that I have to consider, another acronym that I need to learn. I like to call myself I'm involved in Pokemon, and I'm just collecting acronyms and love them. But we have people who are really adverse to that kind of conversation. But we know that between 30 and all the way up to 50-60% of your team will have some sort of neurodiversity. Diagnosed or not, all very valid. If you go and work with engineers, which I have to sometimes, that number is a little bit higher. It's actually quite high. Interestingly enough, my husband is an engineer, we won't go into it. And in contact centres, in customer spaces, we see this number be very high as well. Again, you're attracting people who like a bit of stress sometimes, or sometimes in some customer spaces, monotony and like the simple form of data entry, things like that, it really lights up people's brains. So to be able to say, okay, now as leaders, we need to understand cognition, we need to understand how people's brains kind of work. It's exactly what we're speaking about around this conversation around one-to-one. How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with when things go wrong? We have a conversation in our team, whereabouts on the chaos scale do you sit? I'm a chaos gremlin, I love it, delicious. If there's an emergency, send me. My boss is the absolute opposite to me. Jason Dempsey is absolutely amazing. He loves when his day is planned and nothing interrupts that plan. You can see him leave at the end of the day lit up, whereas that would kill my soul. And so we struggled for a little while where we had this relationship where we didn't really understand each other. He also was having, probably for the first time, an Irish millennial that he needed to, which is like a special type of person, I think, to lead anyway. And we really struggled. We really had, the communication wasn't great. We didn't understand what each other was saying. He was giving me what he thought were really clear expectations. I was walking away thinking, that was a really nice conversation, whereas he thought that he told me off. Like, there was an issue. And then we realized on this kind of chaos scale, he likes things that, you know, he knows what's about to happen. The simple is great for him. And he realized where I sat, and we had this great conversation about it. We plotted our entire team. It's an exercise that myself and Kate go through with teams at Touchpoint often. And we were able to say, oh, how do we give people work that lights up their brain? You're not always going to be able to. Sometimes there's monotonous stuff that I need to do. Looking at Carol and thinking, oh yeah, I need to approve those timesheets, oh my goodness. And so it doesn't always suit, but when there's something within our team that suits my brain, he's able to give it to me and I run with it. Rang me on a Friday afternoon once, I was already in the hairdresser, we won't get into it. He's like, what's that noise? Nothing, it's a blow dryer going. And he told me that I was going to have to do 3 weeks of doing 2 jobs, doing my normal day job and having this project that was actually a bit of a shitload. That was going to land with me and was going to be more than full time. And he was so apologetic, and he came to me a couple of times throughout the project to apologize and to thank me profusely. And then I realized, I was like, oh, you don't realize that because of where I sit, what my neurodiverse brain is doing, this is the best 3 weeks I've had. Whereas I have colleagues that would just crash and burn and they would hate that. Understanding where our teams sit across lots of different types of, like, if we call them spectrums, I don't mean things like ASD, autism spectrum disorder. I just mean, where do people, like, what lights up people's brains? For us to understand that, incredibly important. However, the thing that we have to walk away with is, I sat down with the CEO recently to talk about neurodiversity, getting people back into the office, generally their connect networks. And I talked to him about something that we talk about at Touchpoint often, our social contract. So what are you telling people the expectation is? What's your job as the employer? And what's their job as an individual and as somebody who works here? And he was kind of blown away, and he was like, wait, I can have expectations of people? This is incredible. We're talking about things that we have so many different types of diversities, and we have so many different parts of our identity that we bring to work every day. In an interview, I'll always tell somebody, we hire you as a whole person. We hire you on your best days, we hire you on your worst days. We hire you when you've walked in the door and you think, oh, I haven't paid that spark bill and my phone's about to be cut off. And my child threw cereal all over themselves this morning and just went to school smelling of milk. What can you do? We hire you on all of those days because you are just a person. However, there are things that you need to bring to the table, responsibilities that we have, that we're really trying to help organizations figure out what their social contract is. How do we show up? Everybody showed up here today to come to this instead of, you've got to go to your day job and kind of be somebody different in about an hour. And so how are you expecting your people to show up, and what's the conversation that you're having about how you're going to show up as leaders as well?
Maritha, I'd love you to just your view on exactly the same topic, that neurodiversity. And I'm also really fascinated around, how do we celebrate it? How do we celebrate this fact that now actually we all know what our superpowers are? And how do we allow our people to feel like exactly what you're saying, Anya, when I turn up and I've got an edge to me, there's a way to unlock that in me, so I don't feel like I have to kind of keep that hidden and locked away for, out of work time. So your view on neurodiversity and how we celebrate it as superpowers in organisations.
Great question. I think that, again, frameworks, really, really lovely if it gives us information. Frameworks can be pushed into stereotyping and then it becomes less useful. So, yes, we've heard a lot over the last few years about neurodiversity, and we've all learned a lot about neurodiverse frameworks that can help us just getting a sense of how people may or may not show up. Remember that one person with ADHD is not exactly the same as another person with ADHD. So, and therein lies the big thing, is that we need to talk to each other. I spoke about that earlier where I said the silver bullet is talk to your people. Do we have a safe enough environment where you can enter into that one-on-one conversation where you go, hey, I'm really curious. Remember, I always say leadership is that thing where you are strong enough on the inside that you can show up as soft on the outside. So how can you, when you've got that strength on the inside, how do you make yourself soft and receptive for that conversation where you go, oh, so tell me, this thing called trust, we all think that trust is something that we should have in our workplace. What does trust look like for you? What does trust look like for me? And what does trust look like in the overlap? And how can we then have that social contract that Anya was talking about? That how do we build that social contract about what trust look like for us in organization? What does respect look like? What does accountability look like? Because yes, our leaders are going to burn out. If we as leaders feel like, oh my goodness, we are getting pushed for numbers here, so we're accountable to the stakeholders and the shareholders and whatever to produce numbers, but we can't hold our people accountable, yes, then we're the hand in the sandwich, we're going to get squeezed out. How do we have the conversation about what accountability looks like, what the respect looks like, what trust looks like with our teams and say, what's our shared contract? Neurodivergence is just one way in which people can show up. And yes, we've heard a lot about that because of much more normalized conversations around mental health and about neurodiversity, around much better diagnostic tools, around people going like, I understand a little bit more about myself, so I want to talk about that. So yes, there's a lot that's come with that over the last few years. I can see the next piece that we are going to be talking about is about what does trauma look like for people, because we all come with that. So it really, at the end of the day, is just about how do we enter into those conversations where we build that shared understanding of how do we show up across all dimensions, from a neurodiversity to a gender, to a ethnicity, to a culture. How do we build those social contracts about what those key values in organizations look like for us? And how do we show up soft because we've got strength on the inside?
As we kind of start to tie a little bit of a bow around some of these great conversations, I'd love from the three of you, there's so, I'm listening here, absorbing and learning, there's so many topics that are floating around in my head, you know, diversity, neurodiversity, diversity, mental health, all these things. If you were going to simplify it into a little simple package for these great leaders, what would you focus on? You know, like if you think about the run-in from here to Christmas, if I was a leader and I thought, you know what, I'm really here to serve my people, I'm here to unlock the potential of the people that I represent, I'm going to give something a go till Christmas. What would, if you can turn it into a nugget, what would you go back to the office and have a go at? And you might be already doing it, but you might double down on it. Is it as simple as that? Is there something that you could just narrow all of this conversation into this? Jackie, hard question, but what pops up for you?
Oh, well, my always walk away is that people are people and we've got to connect at a human level. And if you can do that, I think that is where your gold is. And I'm a believer that everybody holds their own gold. So your job is to be curious without judgment to find their gold and to help them bring that to the workplace. I also think nearly part of this for me is it's about having conversations about conversations. Mm-hmm. And if I take us back to young people or Gen Zs, I think we do have to look at the context in which people have been raised, in terms of you've got a generation who has had an iPhone in their hands from a young age, who has been able to find an answer to any question they want like that. So whilst I might have started work, or you may have started work where you do what you're told because that's the norms of the organisation, we have a generation of questioners, and again, that's a stereotype, but for many people in the way in which they have been raised, you know, we've got questioners. And so often when speaking with leaders, it's like, Jackie, why do I need to have a conversation about expectations? Why do I need to have a conversation about how we provide feedback? And my lens through that is you can fight that, and you can be resistant to that, and you can get stuck in why. And I think that comes from fatigue, that comes from burnout, that comes from lack of capacity. But again, if you can shift the mindset to how do I bring people on board, how do we help people bring their gold to work, if I can have a conversation and provide an explanation, my experience is that many young people will go, okay, cool, got it. Mm-hmm. You know, and then there is again that clarity and dialogue, and the miscommunication, the misinterpretations then don't hold a place in the room. And so, You know, holding that people are people, holding that people have their gold. My nugget or my experiment would be have a conversation or name the things that are tricky or name the unsaid. Bring people in and talk about why you want to talk about wellbeing at work and give the rationale. Talk about the importance of clarity and expectations and how they can expect that information. You know, talk about the partnership of what I bring as a leader and you bring as a team. Talk about psychological safety, which is what Maritha's talking about. We've got to feel safe and able to raise our voice and speak up without feeling shamed and judged. So, you know, name the unnamed, have conversations about conversations and see what difference that makes.
Amazing. Anya.
I love it, Jackie. I reckon we'll just build on each other. This is great. I think that using those conversations to create your social contract, and we used to talk about team charters a lot, right? And we go through waves of talking about different things, whether we're talking about, okay, neurodiversity is the new thing, now we need to learn about Gen Z. Okay, now Anya said social contract, oh my God. Just having conversations with your people about, you know, where they might sit on all of those different scales and getting to know their golden nugget. And then, okay, what's the agreement now around how we show up? We had at Auckland Transport similar to Me, We Go, we had me, we, us, where we had, okay, what do I need as an individual? What do we need as a team? And what is the us as an organisation? We ended up, we can't that. Because it started with this me piece where we had people never actually move past the we. We're having great conversations now as an organisation and at Touchpoint mostly about what is my responsibility as an employer and what's my responsibility as your leader. This is how I'm going to show up for you. And these are my styles. This is some storytelling. Everybody in my team knows lots about neurodiversity. They know lots about what it's like to emigrate to New Zealand. They know lots about what it's like to be a senior manager who is very short, don't let this thing fool you, and is a woman. And I come with a huge amount of privilege. I'm white, I speak English as a first language, there's so many things. But they know lots about, because of storytelling, some of those things that I show up with, so that they have space to tell me what they show up with. And so create that contract when you go back. What is your agreement as a team and as individuals? How do we show up to best serve our customers, our clients, whatever it might be, our stakeholders? Because these are the things that we need to achieve as a business. That doesn't mean, okay, because you want to show up as somebody who works from home every day, that doesn't work for the business. Whatever it might be. What is the agreement that you're going to make? And do some really good storytelling about what successes you find from that. We have found that this has happened because people have come back into the office a couple of days a week, if that is what your business is focusing on. We've found that people feel more comfortable and now get work aligned to, you know, where they sit on the chaos scale a lot better. In my team, we tell this story often. I had a colleague who we were so opposite ends of the spectrum. We were best friends. And his idea of my day literally gave him hives. And so we would mill around the office together and then go our separate ways and achieve amazing things because our management space knew, give Anya the mad stuff, give Theo the stuff that lights up his brain. So what is your social contract and how are you going to tell really good stories about the outcomes you get from that?
Maritha.
What she said, all of those. I think what's really important is perspective taking. And not expecting of you to know it all. I mean, we've got this sense that once you're in leadership, you're supposed to know stuff, and you're supposed to know how people, you're supposed to know how to manage people. Actually, we don't until we ask them. So we need to engage into that conversation. And remember, I don't know who of you feel like you've got your strength as a leader inside you yet. It's not something that happens on day one when you turn 21 or when you step in your first leadership role or whatever. So I've spoken about this inside strength, outside softness. When you've got people in your teams showing up spiky, as I call it, or showing out edgy, It's because they have to have that, because they haven't got the internal strength yet. So they show up hard on the outside because they try to build it on the inside. If you can take that perspective, understand that this is the stuff that they're struggling with, then you can show up soft and help just bridge that and work with your teams to actually build that cohesion, that inclusion. Inclusive leadership is not permissive. Inclusive leadership is not indulgent. It is about building this space where you can have those conversations with curiosity and with building that common purpose and common ground.
Amazing. Over to you. So what a treat to hear all these great insights. So if I just do a quick little recap of what I was writing down, because this is going to fuel my day today. Curiosity without judgment. Conversations about conversations. Name the unsaid. The CNC. What's your CNC? Is it the coffee and the croissant, or is it something different? Work that out and go hunt it out for yourself. And what you'll do with there is you'll get that inside strength that allows you to be outside softness. Have you found that yet? Or is that something you should be doing a bit of work on? Explore the social contract, make sure expectations are clear, make sure we're actually aligned, and the things we're asking of our people, they actually know what we're asking and they're okay with it. And then what should they ask of us? Because this is a two-way contract. So there's so many nuggets in there. We've got time for just a couple of questions. We've covered a lot of topics, but there'll be, if you've thought something 3 times, put your hand up and ask that question. It's always a good sign. I keep thinking, but what about, what about? Now's your time to ask, but what about? So, a couple of questions. Who would like to lead us out? Yes. Yeah. Blue shirt. Yeah.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
In this age of flexible working and people having the space to work in the way that they choose quite often, how do you address the needs of a team where you do have specific time frames, where you do have to be at your desk at a specific start of shift, where you do have to answer the phone when it rings? How do you address that expectation?
I'm going to throw that to you, Maritha.
So, again, I would go open it up for a team conversation. Round the table and go, hey, this is what we've got to produce. This is the contract. First and foremost, we enter into an employment contract with people. We pay you, you deliver certain things. That's the basic of our relationship. Then on top of that, we build the how we do that. So now that we are in this contract with each other, let's go like, okay, we have to answer the phone from this point in the day to this point in the day. How are we as a team going to manage doing that? And how are we going to collectively hold each other accountable for doing that? What are going to be the sanctions if we don't do that? Let's get the team to agree together about what the rules of the game are and how we're going to be holding each other to account.
Anything to add?
I know that this is such a topic right now because there's this whole thing of going back to the office at the moment. I've been back at the office for, I feel like it's 10 years now, but since we were able to come back into the office, and we have people really struggling, and coming to Touchpoint often it starts with this conversation about how do I get people back to the office. And they think that they've been very clear. Leadership teams think that they've been very clear. There was an email that came out 2 years ago, and it said, and now I'm really pissed off. And every day I come in and I'm angry because I see that there are people who aren't following the rule that I thought I set. After you've had that conversation, you've created your social contract. Make things so clear. And then just get agreement that there's understanding. That's part of that whole conversation. So we're in the office, whatever, it's 3 days a week and we have to be here at this time. Everybody gets that. We're all now agreeing to the social contract. I'll often send something out to the team and get a message back from one of my fellow ADHD heads and say, TLDR, too long, didn't read. What are you trying to say to me? I'm like, wonderful. And my boss loves a long email, and somewhere in there is what he's trying to say to me. And often I'll just put it into ChatGPT and ask him, what does Jason want? Make it really concise. Don't worry about people are going to freak out that I've set a rule. They're expecting rules from you. Even if we don't want to call them rules, they're expecting for you to tell them these are the things that we do to show up well as a team. Yeah, absolutely.
Boundaries. Anything to add there, Jackie?
Oh, my language around that is there is negotiables and non-negotiables, and it's okay to put those on the line. And actually, you know, as Anya just said, people thrive off boundaries and rules. It's like cell phone bans in schools. I have a lot of friends that are teachers who say to me, actually, the cell phone ban in school has been the best thing that has ever happened for our young people in the classroom in their recent teaching history, because it's taken the grey out of that, and it's allowed teachers to focus on teaching, and it's allowed students to concentrate in class. And so that's now a non-negotiable, right? It's not up for discussion. And so I think it's again being clear around that. The other bit to hybrid work, I think, is do I have time?
Yes.
The other thing about hybrid work is that I think hybrid work can work well when there is foremost a person-to-person relationship. If you have a human relationship that you can then transfer online, I think that can work in a hybrid nature. If you have staff that you have never met or who have never met the team, that can be really difficult. And so it's again working out, you know, through technology, like face to face, if they are in a different location, how you try and replicate that as much as possible. But I think coming back to that fundamental of, you know, something like 92% of communication is non-verbal. Relationships are formed face to face. Friction or tension arises online where it might not in the room, because I have been able to get a different sense of something when I'm with people. So again, how do we talk about hybrid work? How do we talk about what tasks can happen in person versus online? How do we talk about if you're sitting at home and I don't know the answer to a question, when you text or ring or Zoom compared to if you're in the office, you just turn and have the conversation. The other bit to that I think is perspective. So if you've got someone who is in their 50s who has always been 5 days a week in the office, hybrid work probably looks epic. I get 2 days a week now that I can be from home. Like, what a freedom. You have a young person that started their career work from home in COVID. Then you want me to come into the office 3 days a week? Do you know what that's going to cost me? Do you know how much money I'm going to spend on transport? You know how little time I now have to go to the gym? Like, it's perspective, right? And so I think, again, if you take the judgment out of that and you put yourself in someone's shoes for a second, if you can look through their lens, it helps you connect, it helps you then have the conversation to work out how you again come together to make that work.
Quick story, actually. I think parenting is a wonderful thing. I asked my mum at some stage when I had my little toddler, I was going like, how do I get my daughter to do what I want her to do? And she says, guardrails. We were talking about boundaries, the guardrails. She says, we are going to bath. You have a choice. Am I going to carry you to the bathroom? Are you going to crawl to the bathroom? Do you want to slither to the bathroom? How do you want to get to the bathroom? But we are going to bath. And I feel to a large extent that is what we need to do with our teams as well. We are going to be doing that. We are going to be doing this. These are the outcomes that we are going to be producing. Let's now decide, how are we going to be doing that together?
Right. So we're bathing together. We had a question, just the gentleman just here, just to close us off. Sorry.
Yeah, this is going to be probably too long to answer, probably. But one of the common themes I'm hearing is conversation. Right, through all those conversations between leaders and staff. But we do face situations where people don't want to open up to their leaders. Yeah. And that then puts the leader in a difficult position, right? And I don't expect you to have golden answers to that, but I just want to share it.
I do, actually.
Oh, you do?
You name it.
Yeah.
We've tried to have this conversation 3 times, and I'm getting the sense you don't want to talk about it. I'm stuck. This is something we have to talk about, or we're going to have to find a way forward. What do you think we do? Because I'm out of ideas. So I'd name that, and then if you still don't get traction with the naming, you need support as a leader. Yeah. Who's your team? Who's your tribe? In terms of supporting, good, got it. There was a voucher. You know, how do you actually get peer soundboarding or upward soundboarding to help you navigate that? Because you shouldn't have to then do that alone. Yeah.
And remembering that the leadership programs over the last kind of 10 years have taught us about vulnerability, the magical vulnerability word, and people think that means trauma dumping. No. Like, I'm going to tell you the really terrible thing that happened to me as a child so that you do your work. Like, what? Or that's so that you open up to me and then we're able to find common ground because, we both had terrible mothers, like, checkers, this is a lot. remembering that you just don't have to talk about everything at work. We've kind of, the pendulum swings. We went from, like, we don't talk about anything personal in office time. I don't catch up with people on a Friday because that's my family time, you know. It just, those two lines didn't cross. Right over to, I'm gonna wear my pajamas to work and I'm gonna make my neurodiversity everybody else's problem. And, you know, these things that leaders are coming to us and they're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. Either the personality is so out in the open that I know what you had for breakfast and I know what's going to happen later. Like, where we need to swing the pendulum sometimes a little bit and have conversations that are also, this is a workplace. And so not everybody is going to be as open as others, and that's the extreme example, right? But we probably all have one of those people in our office who you're like, TMI. I just sit in the car, my husband dropped me here today, and he has a bunch of engineers who work for them. Remember what I said about engineers and neurodiversity? It was so much fun. And I literally had to hear the most gruesome details of why two people actually were calling in sick. And I was like, not necessary. And he's also ex-military, and so he's like, so can I punch this guy? Or? So there's, the pendulum is swinging in the right direction, but it has become quite extreme for some people.
Okay, well, if I try and wrap that up, because we're out of time, but there is beautiful food back there, there's more coffee, so please carry on the conversations. But what I take out of that is what a privileged job we have as leaders. You know, we get this chance to influence, to create ripples through our organisation. We have the opportunity to learn from amazing people like these wonderful ladies here, but learning from yourself. You have a body of experience in here, and maybe the simple golden nugget is get yourself strong so that you can be amazing at what you do. Take all these learnings, but actually probably you've got all the answers inside of you already. Take pauses like this to remember how well you're actually doing, and then go out with commitments, make little 1% changes and see what flows from that. Total privilege to listen to all three of you. Awesome audience. That's my wrap up, so over to you. And then
Thanks, Neroli. I actually don't know what to say. And it's not often a recruiter doesn't have a lot to say. But look, I think my key takeaway in this is we're essentially an extension of all your businesses, right? We have the privilege and also the responsibility of understanding those that are looking for roles and making sure that we understand your environments. And our part to play in that is actually understanding what the shift is and how we can get to know candidates and make sure that we're representing them in the best light possible. So for us, it's an incredible privilege that you let us into your business, and it's actually a privilege to have you all spend the morning with us, learning, growing, and continuing this conversation.
thank you, team. That's a wrap.